Audi's A3 and RS3 are definitely affordable insanity, depending on exactly how you define affordable. In this video, we're going to talk about pricing, which options you should get, which options you should avoid, and of course, how it stacks up against its main competitors in the US. If you haven't watched the full review of the RS3, be sure and check that out. That should already be on the channel. But let's just dive right into it. The S3 and the RS3 are interesting vehicles, and I'm talking about them both here because a lot of what you get in the RS3, you do get in the S3, dialed down obviously. But if you can't afford an RS3, you can approach what you get in the review that I just released here. For $45,800, you get a very similar look. It's not quite as angry on the outside. You get a lot less power, of course. 306 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.5 seconds. If you get the best launch possible in an S3, it might be about as fast as an RS3 if you're not really paying attention and you're not prepared to use launch control. Big thing to keep in mind is we get much skinnier tires in the S3. They're the same tire width that we find in the A3, so 225 width tires, but obviously these are things that you can swap in aftermarket. And the way the chassis is tuned in the S3 is just absolutely excellent. So if you swapped in slightly wider, really grippy summer tires, you could get close, obviously not replicate the RS3, but you could get shockingly close for a lot less money. Now the a lot less money part requires some asterisks because it depends on exactly how you have it configured. So let's roll through the options on the S3 here that you should know about. The base model is going to be $45,800, but if you want some extra features like the seat memory, adaptive cruise control, the advanced key functionality, that's going to be $48,600 for the Premium Plus package. I would probably get the Premium Plus package, to be honest. If you want features like the LCD cluster, which is pretty snazzy, doesn't look quite the same as the RS3s, but it's pretty close. Heads-up display, matrix LED headlights, you're at $52,400. That is suspiciously close to the RS3, which starts at $58,900. So you notice that the entire price difference between S3 and RS3 is not simply explained by the extra horsepower and the extra go-fast bits. You also get some extra features and some extra luxury touches for the price as well. Thinking of the RS3 sort of as an option package on top of the S3, it's $58,900. You get the bigger tires, 265s up front, 245s in the rear, definitely wide tires, and an interesting reverse of the typical asymmetric tire layout. Much bigger brakes, obviously, more power, the torque vectoring rear axle, more aggressive all-wheel drive system tuning, etc. You get the adaptive suspension system standard. The adaptive suspension system is optional in the S3. It's not exactly the same, but it's pretty close. And importantly, if you live in the city, you get a bigger turning circle in the RS3. It's about 3.5 feet bigger because of the wider tires and the longer engine under the hood. Then there's that extra content we find standard on the RS3, like the adaptive cruise control, satellite radio, a few of those other items as well. Now, back to the options on the S3. I would skip the black optics package on the S3 and the RS3 both. On the S3, it's $1,950. It's really just a style package. I'm not the biggest fan of black accents. Obviously, if you like them, then you might want to go that way. If you do want a really blacked out look, say you're getting the black paint job and you want the full-on black treatment, then it might make a bit more sense. For the rest of the colors, I think it looks a little bit unusual, to be honest. I would also skip the $800 19-inch wheels. They affect ride quality, and I'm not the biggest fan of the way the vehicle rides with those wheels on it. Now, on the base model, I would get the convenience package for $1,500. That's going to give you the auto-dimming mirrors inside and outside. It's a pretty good deal for those. Driver's seat memory, and importantly, blind spot monitoring with rear cross-traffic detection, which we don't find standard on the S3. On the Premium and Premium Plus trims, there is the optional S Sport Pack, and I think that's worth it. You get the red brakes, which do look pretty cool, but importantly, the adaptive suspension system is what we find in that trim. Moving on to RS3 options, there are a few different styling options here. The RS Green Pack is pretty cool, gives you green accents inside, but it is $1,500. I would probably skip that. Also, again, the black optics package, although it's less expensive on the RS3, it's just $750. The carbon package is pretty pricey, $2,750, and really all it does is give you carbon fiber accents. It doesn't lightweight the vehicle or anything like that. In fact, depending on exactly what they're swapping in and out, it might actually be slightly heavier. Then there's the $1,000 Sport exhaust. I would say this is a toss-up. The model that I was driving had the Sport exhaust apparently, but I do think that the regular RS3 exhaust sounds pretty cool as it is. I think this is just a personal preference thing. If you want that throatier exhaust sound, $1,000 is a pretty good price, honestly, for an exhaust system on a performance vehicle. So good deal. Whether or not you might want to get it depends on your preferences. Excellent deal is the optional $450 P0 Trofeo R tires. That's a mouthful there. Now, big thing to know here, These tires are not great under 50 degrees Fahrenheit, so if you live in a cooler area, keep that in mind. Or if you're buying your car in the winter, you might want to skip the option. They're also not great in wet weather. So if you live in the south where it rains, or I guess in the East Coast, everywhere except really where I'm recording this, where it rains in the summer, keep that in mind. And this is a big enough point that you actually have to sign a waiver when you buy the vehicle with those tires on it. But $450 for a set of P0 Trofeo tires, it's a pretty good deal. I would get them. I would burn them off as quickly as possible, put on some regular summer tires, but have as much fun with your brand new vehicle as you possibly can right at the beginning. Now, a bit more of a tricky option here is the Dynamics Plus package on the RS3. It's $5,500. This gives you the carbon ceramic front brakes. It's a pretty good price for carbon ceramic brakes, to be honest. A 180 mile an hour limiter, and the carbon engine cover. If you want to weekend track your RS3, then I would say go ahead and get this option. But for most buyers, it's not going to be worth it, and it is definitely going to increase the maintenance costs on your vehicle. And if you suddenly decide that you don't want the carbon ceramic brakes anymore, you want to go back to steel brakes, that's going to be more expensive than feeding it some carbon ceramic plates here and there. But it is a decent price again for carbon ceramic brakes. On the RS Tech package, I'm a bit torn here. It is the only way to get the Bang & Olufsen audio system in the RS3. The model I was driving did have it. It also includes the heads-up display, which is nice, but I don't really care about that particular option. And it includes the nav software with 6 months of the Audi Connect Plus system, which is the only way you're going to get the Google satellite imagery on the dash. As with other Audi vehicles, if you let your subscription lapse, then it's going to default to the factory nav look, which is just not as snazzy as the Google mapping imagery. Now let's move on to the competition. Obviously, the first competitor here has to be the BMW M235i xDrive, and of course, I am talking about the 2 Series Gran Coupe. There aren't too many options, honestly, in this subcompact luxury performance segment. We have BMW with a mid-level option, but not an option that competes with the RS3. We have Mercedes, and then we sort of have Cadillac. But let's run through the BMW here first. As I said, this is not a RS3 competitor. It's just an S3 competitor. $45,500 buys you this M235 version. You get an 8-speed traditional automatic transmission, so no dual clutch transmission. If you're really worried about smoothness in stop and go or slow and go traffic or really big city kind of traffic, then you might want to get the BMW. On the downside, the 8-speed automatic is not going to be as quick shifting, and the shifts are going to be a lot mushier than the DCT that we find in the S3 and RS3. The 235i is also kind of oddly proportioned. It's definitely longer on the outside, but it's not as big on the inside as the S3 and RS3, interestingly enough. It does have a bigger trunk. It's maybe about 40 to 50% bigger depending on the version of the Audi you're talking about. But on the outside, the result of its size and the front-wheel drive proportions, etc., it looks a little peculiar in a way that the S3 and RS3 do not versus the rest of the Audi lineup. And that's perhaps because the Audi A4, A5, A6, A7, A8, etc., they generally have a long hood proportion, but with a longer front overhang than we find in the BMW lineup. And BMW's rear-wheel drive vehicles, they push that front wheel really far to the front, giving it a very long hood, classic rear-wheel drive proportion that we don't see even in the rear-wheel drive power-biased Audis. The A3, on the other hand, just looks a little bit more like a member of the family since they all have that slightly longer overhang. And I think it's just better proportioned, generally speaking, here as well. When it comes to interior design, I do like the BMW interior a bit more. There are also a few more color options available. You can get a brown interior. There's also an off-white interior. And I like the tech, generally speaking, in the BMW cabin a bit more. With the exception of the LCD instrument cluster, I think that the Audi's is definitely more attractive. One thing to keep in mind, the BMW tops out a little bit less expensive than the Audi, but it doesn't have all the same sort of feature content. There are a few things you can get in the Audi, especially more performance-oriented features in the Audi that are simply not available in the BMW. Next competitor, of course, has to be the Mercedes-Benz CLA. The CLA comes in mild to wild, so you can get a CLA 250 for $38,200, or you could step up to a 35, which is the S3 competitor, for $47,900. That gives you 302 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4.8 seconds, so definitely a little bit slower. And then we have the CLA 45 for $55,900, 382 horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. Now, as we've seen from Mercedes for a while, those models will actually go a little bit faster than those numbers would indicate. but the S3 and the RS3 are generally speaking going to be a little bit swifter. They're also going to be a lot smoother. Mercedes has really worked on their dual clutch transmission, but they've spent a lot less time designing dual clutch transmissions than Audi has, and it really shows. The S3 and RS3, the DCT is simply smoother and easier to live with if we're talking about stop and go, slow window traffic, mountain driving, low speed crawl situations, etc. The Audi is simply much smoother than the Mercedes. And the Mercedes, it's kind of herky-jerky. It's definitely going to take a while to get used to. The other thing you should know is that you need to be really careful with options on the CLA. It is possible to get a CLA 35, not the 45, up to $71,000, actually a little bit over, even before destination. And the CLA 45 is going to be even more expensive than that. That means that you can get a CLA 35 more expensive than the vast majority of RS3 configurations. We're talking about two very different vehicles at those price points. Now, by the time you work your way up to the CLA 45, it is definitely wicked fast and a lot of fun. Both of these vehicles are, but the Audi has the edge here. It has that really interesting rear axle there with the ability to torque vector aggressively, super aggressively across the rear. It makes it feel very different than the CLA 45, which is a hoot and a half to drive all on its very own. The Mercedes, absolutely hands down, is a blast to drive. And if you were to drive the CLA 35 and 45 by themselves, no cross-shopping, they are a blast, and I could see why you might want them. But if you drive them back to back with the Audi competition, then some of the shine does start to come off the CLA. It's not quite as engaging, not quite as much fun. It feels a little bit more grown up, I would say, a little bit more predictable in some ways, and it's definitely not going to be as aggressive at tossing that rear end around as the Audi. Also, it's going to be a lot more expensive. However, I do like the tech on the inside of the Mercedes. Currently, in the luxury space, the Mercedes infotainment system and the instrument cluster, they're the most configurable, they're the most feature-rich, they are a little bit convoluted to operate, but the features and functions that we find in there, I think, are worth that extra convolution. Next up, we have the competitor that you might not have been thinking of, the Cadillac CT4. The CT4 and CT5 are kind of odd ducks in the luxury segment. They're the method by which Cadillac decided to realign the ATS and CTS sedans in their lineup. So previously, the ATS was an Audi A4 competitor, and the CTS was an Audi A6 competitor. However, they never really fit in line with the Germans. They were about the same size on the outside, but they were considerably tighter on the inside. A lot less legroom, a lot less rear passenger room, etc., smaller trunks, that sort of thing. So what Cadillac decided to do was rename them CT4 and CT5 and then slash the price tag, making them more of a subcompact and compact competitor now. So even though it's big on the outside, it's about the same size on the inside as the S3 and RS3. The CT4 is more A4 sized on the outside. If you're confused yet, don't worry. Cadillac marketing will probably direct you along. And that's probably the most important thing to remember, is that when Cadillac is paying for advertisements for the CT4 and the CT5, they're targeting A3 and A4, not as they were before with A4 and A6. At any rate, let's get into the CT4 here. The CT4 comes in a bunch of different power levels. You can get a base version for $33,695, rear-wheel drive, 237 horsepower, 2-liter turbocharged engine. Then for about $45,000, you can get the 310 horsepower tune of the 2.7-liter turbo. Those are the regular CT4s. Then we get the CT4V. The CT4V is $45,895. That bumps that 2.7-liter turbo up to 325 horsepower, and that's good for a 0 to 60 of 4.8 seconds. So definitely slower than the S3. Then we have the V Blackwing, which is sort of the new high-performance version of the V line. That's $58,995. That bumps things all the way up to 472 horsepower thanks to a twin-turbocharged V6 engine. What makes the Blackwing interesting is that it's the only manual transmission available in this segment because, again, remember, this is a subcompact vehicle. You can get the 10-speed automatic transmission if you want to. It's going to be a decent amount more expensive. It's going to bump price up by about $3,000, and it's rear-wheel drive only. So in many ways, it's not really a corollary to the RS3 or the CLA 45 because those are all-wheel drive. This is going to be rear-wheel drive only. Deciding between a CT4 and an S3 or a Blackwing and an RS3 can be tricky because this is really a matter of purity versus fun to drive, I would say is the best way to describe this. The CT4, it's rear-wheel drive. It has a very pure feel, especially if you get the 6-speed manual transmission. This is American muscle car modernized. It is smaller, lighter weight than a traditional American muscle car, but it still has a lot of power. It's rear-wheel drive with a manual transmission that will let you do crazy things if you want. The RS3, on the other hand, is very, very civilized, and it's more video game-like. You floor it, you crank the wheel, it goes exactly where you want it to every time. The amount of grip is absolutely bonkers. It feels lightweight, it feels practically psychic in the way the car will change directions exactly how you want it to. I have zero doubts that the average driver is going to be able to drive the RS3 harder, faster, get even out on a track. If you're going to do that on a track day yourself, etc., you're going to feel like a track day star in the RS3. On the CT4, it's going to require a bit more respect, a bit more practice, a bit more skill, to be honest. To drive a rear-wheel drive vehicle at its absolute limits simply requires a bit more skill. I have to admit, though, that the RS3 is just so much more fun. It's easier to explore those limits, and if my money were on the line, I would just buy the RS3. It's easy to live with, it's lightweight, it's chuckable, and it feels more modern and just more fun. The best way to describe it is simply fun. The RS3 just has that edge over the CT4. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. What would you buy if your cash were on the line? The RS3 is as close to a perfect sports vehicle as I think exists under about $70,000. There are plenty of high-performance German options that are going to be more expensive than this, that are going to be more fun than this. Obviously, some of the high-performance Audis and BMWs and Mercedes that are rear-wheel drive biased, but all-wheel drive with fantastically powerful engines under the hood, those are going to be an absolute blast to drive. But they're also going to be more complicated. They're going to be more expensive to do everything with. Insure, keep on the road, etc. And they're going to require that greater level of respect, I would say, driving them every day. So let me know what you think about all that. Find me over at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and of course, check out the full review of the RS3 where I take a deep, deep dive into everything. You'll find that on the channel already. I'll see all of you later.